I like that.
All right, good evening. My name is Alex DeYoung-Lemke, and I'm a clinical assistant professor in kinesiology and the associate director for academics for the Exercise and Sports Science Initiative, or ESSI, here at the University of Michigan. On behalf of the entire ESSI team, including Ron Zernicke and Ken Kozloff as co-directors, Adam Lepley as the associate director of research, and Susan Rinaldi as the program officer, we're delighted to welcome you to tonight's panel. The mission of the University of Michigan ESSI program is to support sport and exercise-related research, education, and community outreach. We believe it is important to translate sport and exercise-related discovery to communities of all types, ages, and abilities. We are thrilled to connect with other programs with similar passions to deliver tonight's event entitled The Pathway of the Adaptive Athlete. We thank you very much for your in-person, virtual attendance. And before we begin, we please ask that you silence your cell phones. This event will be recorded and posted to the ESSI website. The format of this event is a panel, and we have a great group of panelists here that I will serve to introduce as we go forward, and they will each represent their respective programs and introduce their other panelists therein. This will be guided by questions from the virtual and in-person audience, and I will facilitate passing around microphones with some of the assistants that are here today as well. Lastly, after tonight's presentation, you will receive a survey by email. Please take a few minutes to fill out the survey, as we'd love to continue to bring events such as these to you, and our success depends on this feedback. Now, without further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Okanlami, or Dr. O, who is an assistant professor of family medicine at U of M and oversees the Adaptive Sport and Fitness program. Dr. O also serves as the Director of Student Accessibility and Accommodation Services at the University of Michigan, where he oversees the Office of Services for Students with Disabilities and 2 testing accommodation centers. He is also an assistant professor of family medicine, physical medicine and rehabilitation, and urology at Michigan Medicine, and is an adjunct assistant professor of orthopedic surgery at UCLA. And now Dr. O will serve to introduce his program as well as his panelists. Thank you, Dr. O.
Thank you, Dr. Lemke. Thank you all for coming in person and virtually. As she said, I'm Dr. O. I'm going to be very brief. First, our program here is set to try to provide equitable access to sport and fitness opportunities for individuals with and without disabilities. And we're now housed in the Division of Student Life. And overall, we have 3 competitive sports that we offer: wheelchair tennis, wheelchair basketball, and para track and field. We also have a few programs that we partner with the community, where we've embedded adaptive sports curriculum into the PE programs of the Ann Arbor Public Schools, so that all students now at schools now in middle school in Ann Arbor get to participate in adaptive sports. We also have another grant-funded project that we've been using the healthcare system to then introduce adaptive sports to clinicians, providers, and then individuals in the healthcare system. And then we're working with different local, regional, and national organizations to expand access to collegiate adaptive sport. But we've got several individuals from our program here that I will let introduce themselves and their connection, so that we can make sure that as you ask questions, you know who's represented here. So thank you for the opportunity. First, we've got Coach Kate Rougeau.
Hi, I'm Dr. Kate Rougeau. I am the assistant coach of the wheelchair basketball team here at the University of Michigan. I've been here now for 2 years.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jacob Pettinga. I'm the head adaptive track and field coach here at the University of Michigan, and this will be my 2nd season coming in this summer.
Hi, my name is Sam Grew. I am a medical student here at University of Michigan, as well as a high jumper on the US Paralympic track and field team. And this is my 2nd year here.
My first year part of the University of Michigan wheelchair basketball team, and I'm ambassador for Antibiotics.
Perfect. All right. Thank you very much. I now have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Tinney, who is a clinical assistant professor in physical medicine and rehabilitation with Michigan Medicine. Dr. Tinney oversees the University of Michigan Adaptive and Inclusive Sport Experience, or UMAIS, which aims to enhance the physical, social, and emotional development for people with disabilities by providing quality, local, and low-cost sports and recreation opportunities throughout the lifespan. Dr. Tinney joined the Veterans Health Administration after residency at the University of Michigan and serves as a staff physician at the Ann Arbor VA Medical Center to provide care in a variety of areas such as amputation, general physical medicine and rehabilitation, and musculoskeletal pain. Dr. Tinney will now provide some background on the UMAIS program and introduce the additional panelists for the program here tonight. Thank you, Dr. Tinney.
Thank you, Dr. Lemke. Happy to be here with everyone and share our experience in adaptive sports and adaptive sports medicine. As Dr. Lemke said, I started my career with the VA, where I really learned about the value of adaptive sports in rehabilitation and really continued to carry that throughout my clinical care, and was happy to join faculty with the University of Michigan in 2018. And I was able to join the board of UMAIS. And I have my fellow board members here with me. And it really, UMAIS started as a grassroots program, really bringing adaptive sports and recreation opportunities for patients transitioning from inpatient rehabilitation settings and outpatient clinics, really to engage in the community and have access to physical activity. So I would like to introduce the rest of my board, and we also have one of our UMAIS participants with us today.
Hi, my name is Becky McVeigh. I'm a recreational therapist. I've been a recreational therapist for 27 years. I am happy to be one of the UMAIS board members, and I've been on the board since the beginning of UMAIS, which was in 2017, and I look forward to many years ahead of us.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Voss, and I participate in UMAIS. I'm a marketing representative at an outpatient rehab gym, and also a recreational therapist, but I'm a stroke survivor as well, so I kind of know what it's like to be the therapist and the athlete, and the importance of quality of life.
Hi, my name is Sung Hee Yoon. I'm a rehab engineer at Michigan Medicine. Have been part of Michigan Medicine for about 8 years now, and I'm a board member for UMAIS.
All right, perfect. Thank you very much. So now finally, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Burns, who's a physiologist for the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee, or USOPC. Dr. Burns works with their Paralympic sport disciplines to assess and prepare athletes for demands of their competition, including metabolic profiling, training assessments, equipment modifications, and environmental adaptations. He is also an adjunct assistant professor at the University of Michigan in the School of Kinesiology, with research efforts in sports performance, distance running, footwear design, and analytical efforts with the research team here in sports sciences. Dr. Burns also competes internationally in ultramarathon races and has represented the United States at 4 world championship events over the 50-kilometer and 100-kilometer distances. Dr. Burns will now provide some insights into USOPC and introduce his fellow panelists as well.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so I'm Jeff Burns. Hail from this wonderful state and institution as well. I studied here both undergrad, master's, and my doctoral work. So it's a pleasure to be back here. Yes, and on behalf of the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee, we are Team USA in the sense that we're the organization that supports our athletes at the highest level at global championships and games. And so as a physiologist for our Paralympic athletes, I've had the distinct pleasure of both learning a lot in that space and now helping to, hopefully guide our athletes or support their efforts to win medals. And it's a total pleasure too, to have colleague here, Sam Gardner, who let him give maybe a little bit more of his background, but he comes from strength and conditioning space, but now is the lead for the sports science efforts in our entire Paralympic organization, coordinating strength and conditioning, physiology, dietetics, and all the things to kind of provide holistic sports science service to Paralympic athletes across disciplines. So I'll let Sam talk about maybe his role a little bit.
Thank you, Jeff. We're both really excited to be here. Thank you all for attending, and thanks for all the efforts that went into coordinating this panel. It's fantastic to be here. Sam Gardner, I work for the USOPC, coming in from Colorado Springs, Colorado. I've had 6 different roles within Team USA on and off since 2010. Had a little bit of a hiatus working in pro basketball and with special forces operators in between. Happy to be back in this new initiative, but we're really trying to build out, really trying to elevate Paralympic sport through collaboration within performance sciences. And part of my role is to help try to initiate collaborative efforts between dietetics, physiology, S&C, performance innovation, tech innovation, data analytics, our research review group, And currently we've had a nice push and nice support from administration to build out an internal support team of those different various disciplines. And what I hope to do is make sure that we work together as a team while creating some external environmental opportunities to support our internal daily processes.
Perfect. Thank you all very much. So we can now move into the panel portion of the event tonight. So this will be led by Q&A from the in-person audience as well as the virtual audience, which I will simultaneously monitor. So I'm wearing many hats this evening, but I'll serve as the moderator. So I'll get us started with a question just to kind of warm us up. So while we wait for some questions to come in, it'd be wonderful to hear about how you consult with athletes to understand their own goals and set personal goals to challenge what they might view as the limits of their own capabilities. And then also, since we have athletes here tonight, from the athlete perspective, how has this relationship been for you and what have you been able to accomplish from setting these goals and building this trust with the clinician?
I'll break the ice if that's okay. I love that you asked how you involve the athlete in the process, because I think when working in adaptive sport, or specifically in my realm of Paralympic sport, they need to have a voice in their process. A lot of the athletes I support are living with disability that I don't live with. And if you don't let them have a voice in that process, you're going to miss out on a lot of learning opportunities along the way. I think some of the best modifications and adaptation strategies that I have come up with in supporting Paralympic sports are actually the athletes' ideas and not my own. And I think it's really important in any level of sport to hopefully have athletes earn autonomy and earn a voice and earn a say in their process. At the end of the day, it's their goals, it's their dreams I am here to support. And that is part of my why. I am here to support athletes' goals and dreams and realizing their potential. And if I don't include their voice in that process, you're going to lose out along the way, because when you start working with athletes with no physical impairment or disabilities, it would just be a big missed opportunity if you didn't allow them to have a voice in that process, especially around adapting training stimulus for that athlete when there's many roads that lead to Rome. And if you don't consider some kind of outside avenues, you're going to probably miss out on some golden eggs along the way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I'd just add further to that I feel like helping athletes like define goals, I come at it from a sense of almost pure service in the sense of like the goal has to come from the athlete, and we're just figuring out how to facilitate that. And so I think thinking about an athlete comes and they're wanting to medal at a world championship that's going to be in a hot climate, so now it's like, okay, if that's your goal, one of the things that I can do to help facilitate that is maybe heat adaptation strategies, looking in and that their head may not be there at all, so it's kind of like maybe adding a voice to what might be ancillary or other things related to the overarching goal, but having to come from the athletes. Like Sam said, it's their dream, their vision, their autonomy. And at the end of the day, like if a goal isn't organic in an athlete, it's going to be really hard to make that happen, because I'm going to be very curious to hear what we hear on the different levels of here too, because I think that's very true at the highest level of trying to win a medal, but also just trying to be a little bit more active, because that level of like autonomy has to come from the individual. And I think we're kind of here to find creative ways to make that happen.
Yeah, if I could just jump in, what I really like about coming in maybe at an athlete's first moment of adaptive sport is that they have only seen it maybe in a video that we've shown them when they were in the hospital. And then now we're putting a piece of equipment in front of them, and they're getting their body into it for the very first time. So they have no idea what their goal is. Their goal is maybe just not to fall out of the equipment, like literally. And then we start to build the goals together. And that's really exciting, because then if this is something that they really want to do and pursue, whether they're 5 years old and on our Wolverines team, or they're 60 years old and they just want to continue kayaking every summer with their family, this is something that we as the UMA's board and volunteers can help them do together. So it can go either track, right? It can go really competitive. Like we have a couple young kiddos that I could see going pretty competitive, pretty far, pretty far. And then we have some participants that come and they really are, not just as a poor choice of words, but they really are coming for the pure enjoyment of doing the activity a couple times during the summer, and then that's it. And then they come back the next summer for the same thing. So it's not about being a competitive athlete, but it's about pure enjoyment of doing an activity they didn't think was adaptable to them. So those are both equally as important goals to us.
Yeah, so she's definitely right. Every word she said is definitely right.
And thank you.
Yeah. So I've been playing wheelchair basketball for a little bit over 8 years now. I was introduced to the sport through recreational therapy. So so I had one of the coolest recreational therapists. Still talk to them till today. But they took me up there and I never seen the sport before. And I'm like, they really play basketball in chairs, you know? So they get out there, the team welcome me to practice. We hop in the chair. And you feel very like uncomfortable because you don't know what's going on. You don't know how they pushing so fast, how they're able to shoot the ball. They're falling, they're still getting back up in the chair. Everybody thinks, oh, something is wrong, but they're totally fine. It's a part of the game. But just seeing, you know, people with disabilities getting out there competing for something, talking trash to each other. It's a great feeling, you know. You become friends with people and you get to talk to them about anything in the world, you know, and especially if you're going through something similar to what they're going through. So I can definitely. She said everything.
I
So,
got
amazing.
you.
Got you. He's a great recreational therapist.
Not the coolest though.
Not the coolest.
Not the
that?
coolest though, apparently.
Apparently not.
Yeah,
Second
second
coolest.
coolest.
I'm gonna steal a phrase that Dr. O says a lot, and that's disability isn't inability. And you're gonna hear something that I'm really passionate about is having other people understand that are outside the community know that adaptive sports are sports in every sense of the word. They're just done modified. And what I find a lot of the time is that athletes want to be pushed, adaptive sport athletes want to be pushed. Kind of the unique challenge in adaptive sports, though, is that they sometimes don't understand what that means or don't know how to push themselves because they are never expected to compete on a high level because there is no access. And that's why access on the grassroots level is important, but also recognizing that adaptive sports are competitive and needs to be competitive for a full athletic experience. So yeah, I think that's all I got to say about that. You want to go, Sam?
Yeah, so I think my story is a bit unique in that I spent the first 12, 13 years of my life, without a disability. I lost my leg when I was 13. And so I was an athlete before and kind of thought sports were done so after that. And so my perspective of aiming or setting goals was lower than, what I ever thought imaginable. And so I think from my, coach's perspective, he's the one who kind of told me, he's like, as a high jumper, my goal was, jump 5 foot or whatever. And he's like, oh, dude, you're going to jump way higher than that. He's convincing me I could jump higher than I knew was possible. And so just kind of, it meant a lot to be pushed as an adaptive athlete, especially a new adaptive athlete, pushed to, push myself and to just continue setting goals that are actually, advancing me forward. I think it was unique to live the first half of my life without a disability and sort of regain that sports perspective afterwards and see that, yeah, this is possible. Yeah, this is something that I could do. What's that? Ultimately goal of winning gold medal in high jump, which I did in Tokyo, which was really exciting. And yeah, So a little bit of pushing can go a very long ways.
So I think a little bit what you all were touching on at the kind of tail end of that were some of the misconceptions around adaptive sports. And so can you talk about some misconceptions that you serve to kind of break down, or barriers again that you're trying to break with that component? I see Dr. Tinney is eager to respond. Yes.
I was picking up on that theme as everyone was speaking, thinking about the bias that we have either within us or that we see within our participants or our patients. And very often in my conversations with people, I think one of my most successful, I guess, stories of a patient interaction was somebody who had a beer belly, who smoked, who did not look athletic, yet he showed up to every adaptive sports event I invited him to and tried everything, and then went on to compete in the National Veteran Wheelchair Games. And so even his own bias of what am I, what defines me? Am I sporty or am I athletic? Can I do this? And I think we've all kind of hit on that as to, people will kind of dismiss what's possible within themselves. But also I think even as the people who are the facilitators of physical activity, we also have our own bias. I mean, I've had colleagues say, oh, that person's not athletic, I'm not going to send them to your program. What do you mean the person's not athletic? You don't even know that, right? So I think that we have to just be really careful about dismissing somebody based on what we might perceive to be that sport stereotype. And I think that that's the beauty of adaptive sports is you really don't know what's possible until you just let the person try. So I think that's really important to think about that as we make recommendations or facilitating things for people we interact with.
I think also in my experience working all the way from the junior level, so young kids, 5, 6 years old, all the way through collegiate to post-college or into the community, it's, I can't do this, coach. No, I'm working on it, coach. That's what I want to hear is I can't do this yet. It's the I'm going to. It's so changing that mindset. Yeah. And talking about identity, whether it's social identity or athlete identity internally or externally. Do your parents see you as an athlete? Do your community see you as an athlete? Do you see yourself as an athlete? And how does that change over time? And I think we see that change in individuals who come to the sport wanting to make friends, wanting to get physically active, and then turning out that, oh no, I'm an athlete now. I'm like, well, you were an athlete before, you just didn't recognize it. So having that component with it is incredibly great.
I was going to say one of the, or maybe two of the misconceptions that I see sometimes maybe within our athletes is a sort of strange, I would say, polemic related to what Sam and Jacob both talked about. And it gets back to kind of the goals is I think you see some athletes that come in and get to a high level pretty quick that just think like, I want to, I'm going to win a medal. I want to win a medal, but they're maybe several levels below that. And they don't even see all of the work that needs to go in to get from one level to the next. They just think that maybe the participation numbers are lower and the competitive depth isn't there. So they see, I might be able to just get there really fast and don't realize to what Jacob was saying is that the necessity to have a competitive landscape and depth for a full athletic experience. I think the models, they don't have the essentially the structure to look at and see all of the people who have come before them and all of the work that they put in. Whereas you do see that on traditional sporting sides. So I think that assumption that they can get up quickly, I think is one. But then the paradox, the other side of that is what Sam spoke to is you also see a lot of athletes that don't realize how great they could possibly be, which I think it's kind of cool that you have both of these. And I think that exists in all sport. That's very true. But I think it's kind of blown up in adaptive sport and in the Paralympic sport because of maybe the lack of role models or kind of more broad expectations. So it's kind of in some athletes, we really have to coach that up and help them realize what could be. And others, it's you have to show them the many steps required to be great. Yeah, so I would say I primarily work with our endurance athletes. So, that's like, if that's a triathlete, that's, obviously swimming, biking, and running. But then within those disciplines, like the hours you're putting in each week and the types of interval sessions you're doing. But then, that's the training. And then outside of the training, like what you're doing to recover well and to be prepared for the next training, the S&C that you build in around that. And I think some athletes don't, have no conceptualization that like more than, maybe 8 or 10 hours a week or something like that is enough, or that they shouldn't be staying up till, 3 a.m. playing video games or something like that, So it's like, yeah. So it's like all of those things that in other sports, because of the sharp, the depth, really, you kind of, that gets either weeded out or modeled quickly. I think there is that educational component that needs to happen within athletes.
I'm happy you bring that up because what I see a lot is, like you said, athletes, because what I believe is because adaptive sports is on the lowest levels are very participatory in nature, that these athletes, have initial success in a very, very controlled environment, and frankly, not a very competitive environment. And so they they make these very lofty goals that 12-year-olds saying that they're gonna go to the Paralympics, and it's because they don't have that competitive environment that most high schoolers, most middle schoolers have, where there's clear winners and losers. And that's an important development step in an athlete, is learning how to win and learning how to lose and understanding where you stack up. I also want to touch on kind of the flip side where, like Sam was saying, some athletes also don't believe in themselves. Like there's some athletes that believe tremendously in themselves and some that don't. So we have a young lady on the track and field team who, when I first got her, she has cerebral palsy. She didn't know how to skip, and she wants to sprint. And one of the things that's very important ability during training when you want to learn how to sprint is knowing how to skip. And so as I was teaching her, and as other coaches helped me coach her how to skip, she would say, like, Jacob, if I could do this, I wouldn't be in adaptive sports. Yeah. And I was like, Maddie, just because you can't do it now doesn't mean you can't do it later. Like, you have the capacity to get better even with your disability. And so, yeah, I think.
I do want to push back just a quick comment about kids or individuals with disabilities, basically assuming that they could get to the top. I just want to remind everyone about the kids that say they're going to play in the NFL because they like football, and they're like, I'm going to play for Michigan. My stepson literally said he played a couple games at recess football. And like, maybe I'll go to U of M because they have a good football team. And so, kids all the time, regardless of disability, say, I'm going to go play in the NFL, lofty dreams. So I just want to put that out there for people to think about.
Yeah.
I'll add two quick things that are sort of broad and more general. One is in terms of misconceptions. I think when people talk about sport and they talk about disability, many people are not familiar with the difference between sort of the Special Olympics movement and the Paralympic movement. They're two very important things that some individuals can cross into both categories, but I think what sometimes happens is people then conflate the two as one. They're very important, but I think that that's one thing that a lot of times when people think of disability in sport, for some, they think that that's actually an oxymoron because they don't know how you can be disabled and be an athlete, right? That seems to be oxymoronic in the phrase. So I think that one, just recognizing that there's a distinction and there's a space for all of it, which is important space. I think that's one distinction. The other thing that we talk about in our program is the fact that while we are talking about sport for individuals with disabilities, The way we try to view adaptive sport, and this is not something that is widely accepted actually, so I'll put that out there honestly. We feel as though adaptive sport is truly accessible and inclusive sport. And so you do not have to have a disability to be able to participate in adaptive sport. So an example is wheelchair basketball. You can be an individual that does not use a wheelchair in your day-to-day life and still be a wheelchair basketball player. You probably saw Steven walk in just now, and there are two individuals that are sitting in our audience right here that have played high-level wheelchair basketball, and you see them leave, you'd have no idea that they ever maneuvered a wheelchair. But just like you have to learn how to skate to play hockey, you need to learn to maneuver the tool of your sport to play an adaptive sport. And the reason that we push this forward is that if you're in your community and you're the only child with a disability and you want to play wheelchair basketball, you cannot play wheelchair basketball with a team if only one child is on that team. So if you have non-disabled students that are also learning to maneuver these sport chairs, you now create this network of students that see sport as just sport, and they see their peer with a disability as no different than them learning to play a sport at that same time. So those are the two things that we see: one, conflating Special Olympics and Paralympics, and then two, thinking that adaptive sport should only be for people with disabilities alone.
Are there any in-person questions? We have some from the virtual audience, but yeah, there's a question over there. Oh, wait, we'll wait for the microphone. Sorry, just because on Zoom we'll need people to hear. Thank you.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I had a question about how coaches, or maybe even physicians or whoever is helping athletes, of course, with the nature of physical disabilities, they manifest themselves in different ways. So I was wondering how we have this theme of being able to push athletes to the best of their ability. I was wondering how you navigate that with different physical disabilities, and how you evaluate them based on their goals and, the level of sport they're playing, but also taking into account the disability as well.
I could speak to that as far as assessing people with a variety of disabilities. I see, all variety, people who are wheelchair users, people who are amputees. And really, you had actually mentioned the answer in your question as far as asking the person, what their goals are. I think it's important to have an understanding of baseline function, which is really kind of inherent to my discipline, and having an understanding of that, and then having the ability to kind of foresee, what might be attainable as far as setting goals in concert with that person's, interests. So, of course, when we traditional, physician model, you'll say, well, you're going to go do this and you're going to try it. It's going to be great. I certainly have, try to be respectful of my patients. And if they tell me this is what I want to pursue, so how are we going to do that? What are the tools that you need? What is the training that you need? At a very base, like when I have somebody who's a new amputee and they're learning to walk again, I know generally the question, the first thing they're going to say is, I want to walk with a prosthesis. I say, well, how are we going to do that? And if somebody's in poor health, I say, well, what have we done to help that along the way? We've got to do strengthening, we've got to do conditioning, we've got to prepare your body for this. And then that would translate over into sport. So we kind of take that, from the baseline function to then what are the activities they want to pursue that are meaningful to them.
Yeah, and I would just say that as recreational therapists, our background and training is in programming for every type of disability. And then once we have created that program and we've done all the assessments and et cetera, all the background work that we need, when the group of people shows up for martial arts like we've had, and it's maybe not quite the makeup that we thought it would be, then we have the training to pivot on the spot so that it's safe for everybody and an effective program. Because of the the kind of pre-planning that we've done. So that's a good question.
And I think as a rehab engineer, this applies to sports and also everyday things as well for people with disabilities. I think my ideal goal is that whatever adaptations or assistive technology that I'm recommending for the person would then create a level playing field That's my like kind of the dream, ideal goal. It may not be that case in the end, but that's kind of how I approach assessing each individual's differently.
One of the things that I think is like one of the coolest things about sport in general is that athletes are kind of like explorers in the sense of like, you don't really know how good you can be at anything. And just the task of getting better for your sport and an athlete, really at all levels, is about probing yourself and kind of finding new limits. And the thing that I think is like the coolest, one of the coolest things in the Paralympic world is like, because athletes, so many of the athletes and even the external world put different kind of like, I would say like limits or conceptions on that. But I think like, I mean, I can't think of any athlete that I've worked with so far that I haven't looked at and thought, I have no idea how good you could be, like, because the ceiling, there probably isn't a ceiling, but it's like, we just know so little about athletes in general, but then, you know, athletes with any level of physical impairment, it's like, yeah, we have no idea what we could do. And to Jacob's point of like, what you can't do now, but you could do later, that just opens up all sorts of doors. So one example of that, and I'm going to tag Sam here after this to give us a good example as well. But I think of like, you know, an athlete, a triathlete that we have that just very, very, very good, like one of the best in the world, like has a spinal cord injury, doesn't have the really the ability to thermoregulate very well. And so this is something probably a lot of people might not know, but some individuals with spinal cord injury lose the ability to, or lose some degree of autonomic nervous system activity. So things like sweating is impaired, and that's a critical piece of our thermoregulation, which in any sort of summer games situation, when it's hot, that's pretty critical for an endurance athlete. And it's, you know, widely thought that that's just a byproduct of the injury. And this athlete, through, you know, dedicated preparation for heat, started to regain the ability to sweat a little bit. And it's like that type of thing, that competition pushes athletes to figure something out to get better. And it's like, if that competition can be a context to completely reevaluate like what's not just what's possible in the sporting domain, but really what's possible biologically, I think that's super cool. So I think, yeah, just that idea of like what's possible. I think that question is even more unknown in Paralympic athletes.
Yeah, I have a really great follow-up to that. And you might be able to answer it, Sam, with your response here, but I'm going to try to link two questions together from the Zoom. But it's getting to this point of, right, like if someone is trying to get to that elite level, kind of where do they start? But also the psychological aspect. What does the self-talk look like? How can you promote positive self-talk to get to that high level, right?
Yeah, I'm fortunate to work with a great team of people, which also encompasses psychological services, both from a mental health standpoint, but also a performance psychological standpoint. One thing I've always tried to preach as an S&C support staff member is, I don't want to hear about what you can't do. We're going to worry about what you can do. And I think that that's basic. And you could say that to anybody, whether it's adaptive sport, able-bodied sport, and such forth. But as athletes progress through this pipeline, sometimes they might come into a new environment, like an Olympic Paralympic training center, and start looking around at elite athletes at the highest level and say, well, I can't do that. Well, I don't want to hear about what you can't do. We're going to worry about what you can do. And just because you don't think you can do it today doesn't mean we can't do it tomorrow. So that's, from a coaching standpoint, something I've tried to instill, but also with support staff that transition into supporting the adaptive athlete, whether it be a coaching aspect or physiology or dietetics. That's been one shared message I've tried to preach along the way, is focusing more on what we can control, less on the things we can't control. But also within all this, I always thought the high jump was just a kind of a great metaphor for life. And Sam's example earlier of how he had his own doubts, but the beauty of the high jump, once you clear a bar, the bar gets higher. You reset, you recalibrate, you reestablish a new goal. And I think, with Sam sitting here, I just thought I'd have to at least make a quick point to that, because I feel like if there was a metaphor from sport to life, I always felt like the high jump was one of the best metaphors that exist when we start talking about goals, potential possibilities. And I just think it's fantastic that we have a high jump gold medalist sitting here right now, because every time Sam cleared a bar, that bar got higher. And Sam had to probably figure out, what it is that it was going to help him get over that next level bar. So probably nobody better to speak to that specifically than Sam himself.
Yeah, thank you, other Sam. And one of the unique things with high jump, besides just clear the bar gets higher, is that even the winning competitions still end with you knocking the bar over. So when I won in Tokyo, you still take jumps until the bar goes down, even if it's just you competing. And so even at the highest, most competitive point in my life, I still found myself extremely frustrated with what I was doing. I was still knocking over the bar. I was the only one left. And I think there's always that element of pushing to the next level. And for me, I think where I found success is kind of just holding myself to my own standards, not using those around me to compare myself to. I have not yet found that skill in medical school. That's a big one. But in athletics, just setting my own goals that don't involve others. So for me, for Tokyo, for example, it wasn't go win a gold medal. It was, jump 1.95 meters. And if everyone else jumped higher than that, I can't control that. That's, there's no defense in high jump. But if I cleared that was my goal. And I think that's something that's kind of changed my mindset a little bit, is just setting goals that I can control, and anything else is beyond my control. And I try not to worry about it. And I think that's just one psych element that's gotten me far.
Are there any other in-person questions? There's a bunch coming over Zoom, but I want to give everyone in the room a space as well. Yeah.
My question is about research. I feel like traditionally coaches can rely on research to inform their decision-making process. Curious if I could get some insight in terms of the landscape of research for the adaptive athlete, and maybe how that informs your process.
That was also a Zoom question, so
That was mine. No, I'm just kidding.
telepathic, yeah.
I'll jump in and start there. I mean, I think it's interesting. It's very it's tempting to say there's not enough and it's small, and that's true. But I will say there is a lot of sporadic pieces of information out there that are, I think, good for putting together hypotheses and even case studies. A lot of that, because I think one of the truisms of Paralympic sport that I've come to learn is that like each athlete is a hyper unique case study. So even in a research study where you have, say you were to have 10, 15, 20 participants, I mean, if you had 20 players on a wheelchair basketball team and you aggregated lessons from all of them, they probably all have very different, came into their injury with different, different classifications, different. So even just lumping and drawing generalizations is really challenging. You could have 10 athletes within above the knee amputation, but it all stemmed from different reasons, which then makes generalization tough. So it's really hard to do research in that space. And yeah, there's certainly, I would say, not enough could be done. We could have a lot more. But I think there's some there that is really, really interesting to kind of like spark things. But the appetite for it, I think, is enormous. Like, I mean, I can't tell you how many coaches that I've had that ask me like, well, what's known about training loads in para triathletes or para Nordic athletes? Like, not a whole lot. So I think the number of questions is like dramatically outsizes the content.
And I think it'll grow together, right? because you have to have enough programs, to have enough participants, to have enough data to draw any sort of conclusion or even start with the hypothesis. So I think it will grow together, and one might be faster at certain eras or seasons than the other. But I think, yeah, we need to have more programming and more accessibility to do adaptive sports at every level to get to a point where there's readily available data pool.
Can I pick on you for one more second? Because the kind of follow up to the question on Zoom about this is about new technologies and emerging technologies to help the adaptive athlete. So can you talk a little bit about this space?
So I can talk actually further about the technology world in for an adaptive athlete in their day-to-day life, because I'm a rehab engineer, so I work with people with disabilities, whether they play sports or have any sort of active recreation or not. So I will plug Apple and say that historically Apple has always been a really inaccessible device and a company, and Apple historically has not played well with other third-party companies and devices. But I will say for people with disabilities, Apple's accessibility suite has just blasted open in the last probably 4 or 5 years. So I will give them a shout out. I have no sort of connection, but I will say for an individual with really extensive level of disability, even if you can't move anything below your neck, you can, with the single switch, have full access to an Apple device with their native features on the device. So I will say that's one shout out. Oh, and gaming too. So a big, that's even, esports. There's been a huge push in esports with the creation of the Xbox Adaptive Controller. So Xbox and Microsoft worked with therapists and individuals with disabilities to create an adaptive controller called Xbox Adaptive Controller. And what I love about that device is that they didn't try to do a one-size-fits-all solution, which everyone I think here would agree, it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution for an individual with a disability. And they created a device where it has jacks for every single button that exists on an Xbox regular controller, and opened it up so you can plug in different sort of devices that would be accessible for an individual with a disability, be it you can't move anything below your neck, or you have a hemiparesis, so you can't move one side, or you have weakness or spasms or any sort of like the gamut of things. You're able to use the adaptive controller with specialized equipment, and you can access a game and be able to play. Also, they did open up a feature called Co-Pilot, so you can split up your controls. So with two standard controllers, if you want to play with your little sibling that really wants to play with you, and you're like, you're gonna really kill my streak, you're gonna ruin my record, you can give them a single switch and give them just the blast button, and you can do everything else, and then split your controllers so your siblings or cousins or whoever can play with you. And so I feel like Xbox and Microsoft has really done great work. And with these big names, I will plug that my big passion is that adaptive equipment is expensive because the commercial world feels like there's a smaller market. So small businesses make these devices, and it makes the adaptive equipment, sports equipment or not, super expensive. So when you have big names like Apple or Microsoft diving into this field, it really cuts down the price. So the adaptive controller is $100. Traditional adaptive controllers can run anywhere from $500 to $1,000 more. So, yeah.
I could just segue on equipment in general, maybe not high technology, but just the landscape for, if you're talking about the pathway of the adaptive athlete, and the barrier to entry is, requiring an expensive piece of equipment to be able to do that sport. Industry isn't really following as far as the market, saying that the market is limited. And so you don't have manufacturers really pushing to be able to create things that are, less expensive and more accessible to people to purchase. And so a lot of times the adaptive athlete may apply to a charity or organization to be able to, through a grant, obtain their piece of sports equipment. But certainly that's really not a solution to be able to get as many people engaged in physical activity as possible. You have the benefit of working for the VA system, which puts a lot of funding towards equipment and of all variety for adaptive sports for veterans. But it's really rare outside of that system to see that. And so that's one challenge, even just for introduction. And then the other thing that thinking about the elite athlete, and you might speak to this, is what that challenge brings when you have limited access to equipment, even at the, elite level.
Yeah, I think we started thinking about equipment specifically within the technology component. It can be a complete game changer at the elite level, where athletes might be kind of using something that they've acquired along the way, but not having modifications to that equipment. And as athletes become stronger, faster, more mobile, that equipment needs to adapt with them. And that's another challenge for the elite athlete. Within that, there's kind of a 3-tier bucket. I look at the equipment for the elite athlete. There's the equipment they need in their sport, maybe for locomotion, let's say pushing a raised chair, using a hand cycle, jumping on or running on a prosthetic limb. But there's also the daily use equipment. So your day leg, your day chair is another example. And from where I sit around trying to keep athletes healthy first and foremost, because we can't have performance without health, we see more soft tissue injuries in the use of our daily equipment than we do in our sporting equipment, because a lot of times that day equipment isn't nearly as modified or as adaptable for that athlete as it is in the sporting equipment. And then the third tier is we might have athletes who are using equipment that was designed for able-bodied populations. So maybe something like rowing, where it's designed for somebody who's my height with full legs, pressing into the boat and pulling on the paddle or the oar, excuse me. And somebody who has no legs is using that same oar in that same boat configuration. So there's 3 tiers to where equipment can really make a difference in elite sporting avenues. And it's fantastic that through the VA, some of the athletes I work with who are associated with the VA might have an annual stipend to address these considerations. But for other athletes, they literally might be competing on the same prosthetic limb that they've had for 6 years through 2 quadrennial cycles. And they're stronger, they're faster, they're leaner than they were even 2 years ago. So having avenues and ways for us to actually take equipment modifications to find ways to make sure that it's adapting with the athlete, but not just where they are today, where they're hoping to be tomorrow, is really, really important, really critical for athletes to sustain or reach new levels of success in elite parasport.
And I guess one other piece to kind of tie in the technology side of that kind of speaks a little bit to the third aspect Sam had, but so many at an elite level, there are so many, say like, gadgets and quantification tools that we use that are critical for sport and are ubiquitous, that make assumptions based on like an able-bodied individual. So a really classic, I would say exemplary example is, we have athletes, cyclists and triathletes who use a power meter on their bike. For any high level cyclist, that is like, that's the water that they swim in as fish, is like the number from that power meter. And that's critical. And it's what makes cycling very beautiful for physiologists and sports scientists, because you have a nice workload metric. But that power meter, most manufacturers in some fashion make assumptions about dual-sided drive, that, you might have the strain gauges on one side of the crank or something like that. And so the number that you're getting has all sorts of assumptions that you're having some sort of equal drive on both sides. So we have athletes that their power meters, they're kind of just guessing at what the rough conversion is from, they know it's not exactly half the number, but it's, there are shades of gray around that. And that's an example of a relatively like ubiquitous, simple piece of technology that is really hard to customize and reverse engineer that, but is, I think, you see that all over the kind of sporting landscape of things like, hydration sensors coming out is another one that we were talking about, like, I just mentioned about, thermoregulation in athletes with spinal cord injury. Like that could be awesome to know, sweat rates and sweat contents, but those same sensors are built on algorithms that are trained on, data from, whole body studied and obviously able-bodied individuals that are, I think any generalizations are going to be complicated. And so I think the algorithms and the structure of a lot of the technology that we use in the elite sporting world is built on assumptions that are challenged. So that's, I think, another tough piece with tech.
And I think that also part of the problem is that there's a gap between the high tech companies that produce these metric devices for high performances for individuals with no disabilities, and then gap between that demographic and then the clinicians or the adaptive sports experts who have the experience working with people with disabilities. And I feel like there's got to be a bridge, because you don't want to reinvent the wheel, and you don't want to create a bunch of tech companies that make these devices specifically for people with disabilities when there are already companies that are backed with research that are creating these high-end devices. This whole idea of universal design, I feel like there's something needs to happen where the two worlds collide.
Any in-person questions?
Could I comment on just
sure.
the original question real fast? So the original question about how does research impact your training decisions? And so just real quick, outside of the adaptive sports, I work with the varsity level track and field team here. So I work alongside coaches that would be considered pretty elite. And quite frankly, from the collegiate side all the way down, these coaches aren't looking at primary sources, primary studies. They're looking at secondary sources that distill these studies down and put them into a book or put them into an article. And that's how a lot of coaches get that information. And so I think, and there's not a lot of that secondary information on adaptive sport training. And so what needs to happen is people like on this panel, people who coaches, athletes who've been through the process need to create these secondary sources so that the mom in Iowa that coaches her son, because there is no coach that knows anything about adaptive sports, can coach her son effectively. So thank you.
That's great. Thank you. I think I saw your hand up. Yeah. We need it for the Zoom. Sorry.
I guess this would be a 3-part question. So if you could improve or change one thing in Paralympic sport at the grassroots, collegiate, and at the highest levels, like the greatest ROI, what would the one singular thing you would do?
Funding. Yeah.
Very academic
From a development or classification or equipment, assuming we have all the money.
Yeah. Oh man.
Money's endless.
Money.
I could get philosophical. I could probably spend a week thinking about this, but money and monetary means is clearly a common theme. But for me, like I try to start with people first, people, purpose, and process. And for me, it's trying to get more good people interested in helping and interested in being involved. I think having worked in professional basketball or with special forces or with Olympic champions, sometimes people want to talk to me about those experiences, and they're less interested in hearing about my experience in parasport, which is what I've specialized in the last 9 years. And for me, working in parasport has been fantastic. It's been humbling. It's been challenging. It's been inspiring. It's forced me to think critically. It's forced me to be comfortable being uncomfortable sometimes. And a lot of skills that I've learned while working with parasport have helped me in life. Have helped me in being hopefully a better practitioner, maybe potentially a better person in some aspects. And I think for me, it's having interest in the movement that's been growing in this country. I think a lot of people just aren't really privy to what adaptive sport is or what Paralympic sport is. And Dr. O did a great job talking about one of the biggest misconceptions about, Special Olympics and Paralympics, which I would completely agree with. I think having interest in getting good people on the bus and getting them in the right seat to drive in the right direction is really important. And I think from where I sit, it's trying to help educate elite coaches or elite practitioners from these other avenues that people are generally more interested in, that, hey, this para movement is special, and you'd probably be wise to consider it, and you'd probably be wise to learn from it. So for me, apologies to Michigan for being able to kind of pry Jeff away from you guys, but it's just trying to find more good people that are good practitioners to get involved. And the money wouldn't hurt along the way to get more of those people paid to get in these roles. But I am always going to try to advocate for sharing knowledge, talking about distilling information down to the coaches. I try my best to pay it forward, and have had at this point 31 different S&C volunteers, interns, and or fellows that have now been exposed to Paralympic sport in the last decade. And I guest lecture at 3 different universities to try to teach about the importance of elite Paralympic sport performance support. And that's not enough. There's always more to do. But if I could go anywhere outside of finances, I would point to people and try to educate people and let them know that this is something they should consider getting involved with.
I'll actually echo Sam by providing possibly a mechanism, right? Because Jacob said something I say earlier, that disability doesn't mean inability. I think one of the steps to then get some of those people is to destigmatize disability in the first place. I was going to mention this earlier with one of the questions about technology and research. My 11-year-old is sitting out there doing something right now, but the number of different baseball bats that exist for Little League baseball when you're 8 years old, because of the technology that's been put into seeing what these 8-year-olds need to play baseball, far outweighs what we have for a lot of parasport. And so I think that, I didn't mention earlier, I was a All-American athlete in college at Stanford before I acquired my injury. And I know what opportunities were afforded to me in sport. I knew what sort of access existed. And as you were saying, at all the levels, grassroots, collegiate, Paralympic, we don't have that same access for parasport. And I think it's really just because people don't necessarily recognize it. They don't know it exists in the same way. And the people that do know about it have a misconception of what it actually is. And so I think that the thing that I would change is actually the conception of what disability means, and the fact that sport is something that should be accessible to everyone. Because too often, when we talk about research, one of the things I say, people know I'm not a researcher, because to me, a lot of the things in parasport are like saying that you need a parachute to jump out of a plane. Why do we have to justify why a disabled individual needs access to the same thing that non-disabled people are already getting? And so that's what I think we do too much, is having to prove why this population needs something that we have plenty of data to show why everyone else needs it and wants it. And this community not only needs it and wants it in the same way, I think at times even you could say even more so, because now this is not just something for my enjoyment. It's not just something that I want to then do, but being able to be physically active as part of my health and wellness. And if I'm not able to then find avenues to be physically active, that is not just going to be sort of psychologically damaging for me, but that's also physically damaging, because I'm not just not excelling and getting to the next bar, but I actually am starting to have sort of adverse effects of my life because this literal sedentary lifestyle has not afforded me opportunities to be physically active.
I'm going to echo that. And certainly, when I think back when I was running a rehab department and asking my leadership for a recreation therapist to add to staff, they asked me, is it necessary or is it nice? Well, my answer is necessary, of course. They viewed it as nice. Took me 3 times, eventually got it. But, when I think about that, and I think about, if adaptive sports and recreation or physical activity for those with disabilities is viewed as really novel or niche, and that's only at the grassroots, donation-driven state, then how can you grow it if it's not part of a really lasting infrastructure? I think that's really an important thing, that, the landscape of a lot of adaptive sports programs like UMAIS are all built on charity and donations run by nonprofits. And so it's really critical for that to change so that it doesn't become such becomes more of a necessary thing that's just part of, physical education curriculum, is part of the school system, it's all the way up to where it feeds into the elite levels.
I always kind of draw the parallels between adaptive sport and the Title IX, when women were given access to sport in the NCAA. And I mean, that wasn't that long ago. We still have people alive who were part of women who were still alive, or were a part of the first national championships in the NCAA. And I think this one of the single most important thing you could do for competitive adaptive sport is have the NCAA sponsor adaptive sport, because that's in America. That's where all of the money for sports is. It's in the NCAA, and it kind of ties into our financial issue here. But yeah, I think to your point, the NCAA sponsoring adaptive sport, I think, would go really, really far. In the same way that we don't even think about women not having access to sports, and especially like for track and field. Track and field is one of the most equitable sports between men and women. Like people are just as interested in the women's national champion in the 100-meter dash as the men. So yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just I can speak to the college level at least. So I high jumped at a lovely institution, University of Notre Dame, go Irish, for undergrad. And I competed on the able-bodied team, and I can't count the number of times that during my tenure there, I would tell folks I jumped for them, and the response would be something along the lines of like, "Oh, that's so great. They love that you joined the team." And it kind of demonstrates, it's from a good place, from them, but demonstrates this preconception that it's a charity type environment, a pity type thing. I was competing as a Division I athlete, doing the same thing as my two-legged counterparts were doing, but there was still an element of, oh well, you must just be allowed to do it because they like to see it or it's inspirational, as opposed to just sort of viewing it as, you're an elite athlete, you're competing, on an elite level. And so the intersection of adaptive sports at NCAA right now really only exists for folks who are able to compete in an event that can exist in the same space as its able-bodied counterpart. High jump, I don't have any really adaptive equipment. If it were seated throws or wheelchair racing, I wouldn't have been able to compete because there's just not the space, there's not the infrastructure that the NCAA has allowed for it. And it's really frustrating that that's the only space for that to intersect right now. And there's a lot of cool things going on to move that forward, but it's difficult to really set up any sort of foundational things for adaptive sports in college if that's still a perspective from the general public, I think.
Yeah, I think the common theme of the last couple of responses was on advocacy, right? And so what have been some effective strategies that you've used, especially, I'm kind of linking together questions again. So from the healthcare provider standpoint, but also like the institutional or the kind of built environment, right? Like what are some good ways to advocate to have more access for adaptive athletes in sport?
I think, and part of, I'm a coach. I coach adaptive sports, and so kind of what I see my role as is at Michigan is to create the best athletes that I can, because great athletes like Sam get attention in places like this, and maybe that's not how it's supposed to work, but it's how it works right now, and so allowing athletes who have the talent to take the sport seriously, and to let them live out their dreams and be competitive, I think gathers a lot of attention and will gather more attention to adaptive sports.
I think I'm going to try to keep my answer short because I have a long laundry list of advocacy initiatives that I've worked on through the course of my career, but I will try to keep it short. I think I really tried to advocate at the individual level initially, as a physician just sitting there in front of my patient and making sure that they have, I'm facilitating properly the opportunities to help them live their healthiest life possible. And if physical activity is the way to do that, then that's what I'm going to do. So thinking about that, and then I think, okay, it's not just simply me recommending exercise, because we all know how well that goes. Generally, as a physician, you just tell your patient to go exercise, they're going to just go do it. But it's even more challenging when there's no place to do it or no equipment to do it. So then I had to take it further, right? So then I had to learn about the equipment, learn about, programs, really going and seeing the programs, what kind of support do they need, really having that understanding with my community to know what I'm actually recommending. And then from there, really then being involved in the programs, I kind of took it even the next step further. But certainly there are many ways I found, at least for my own career pathway, to be able to facilitate at multiple levels, but every individual can do that no matter what discipline you're in. Because if you think about the landscape, now that you've kind of heard everyone talk here of all these different facets that surround the adaptive athlete, that there's many ways that you could advocate.
I think policy is another way, that's a little, I think, pretty obvious. Policy changes is a way that individuals that may not see themselves as being really gung-ho about sports or, being an athlete could be an advocate. As Sam mentioned, we just need more bodies being interested in this and pushing this forward. And just recently in Michigan, the no fault changes in Michigan, there were a lot of because of the change, there were a lot of detriments to individuals with disabilities not having the coverage from the insurance. I think the biggest thing was that there was not going to be, it was questionable whether or not there's going to be a grandfathered in aspect of having insurance. And for those who may not be familiar, the no fault insurance, auto insurance covered pretty much essentially everything medical related, including having access to adaptive equipment and assistive technology. But with policy and law changes that affected people who had the insurance before the change to not be able to grandfather it in, or it was questionable. So we had people actually going to the state capitol and, fighting. And so that could be a huge thing, advocating for policy change. But that also means that you have to be aware of what policies affect your day-to-day and school curriculum. So the PE curriculum, and that's all part of policy, right? You vote into it as a citizen. You learn about what goes into the K through 12 curriculum and find out where the gaps are, and then you can go talk to your representatives. And so as an individual, if you want to get involved, do the research of what policies exist and how you can help. And so that could be another way you could advocate for individuals who want to adapt to sport.
So I think one way, that we could do advocacy better on the elite side is how we tell the stories of the athletes and what they go through. Because, I came into Paralympic sport, not because it was Paralympic sport, because it was sport. And I saw that like my skill set could make probably the biggest impact with those athletes, because sport is sport. It's competition. And like my heart is in, running and endurance sport. And so for me, I always look at things as like racing is racing. Like, F1 is fascinating for that dynamic. Just like, a paracyclist, racing to me is a fascinating competition. And so more people learning just the dynamics and what's at stake for these athletes, because I think that's what makes sport really compelling outside of just the competition in its own self, but what it means to each athlete. And so the way that we tell stories, I think about a lot of our Paralympic athletes kind of frustrates me sometimes, in that the story is often like centered around like their disability. And that's like the background information. I think it'd be a lot better if you got the stories on our athletes that were, I would say, kind of unrelated to that. Just like we would tell the story of any athlete, what they were struggling with and what it meant to them to get to where they are, because that's exactly what it is. And so Sam going into Paris Games next year will be in his third year of medical school. And I think like that, if I'm, following that, that's crazy. Like that's crazy. Like he's going to be in medical school trying to jump higher than anybody in the world. And so I think like that's the type of thing when you watch him jump and you know that's what's at stake and that went into it. To me, that's the thing that'll make me cry if he clears the bar, not because of, his disability like that. I think that too often our stories just gravitate towards that. So if we could start telling the stories about our athletes that we see every day, because I'm to the point now where when look at it's like I don't see that. I see the things that they're struggling with every day and so need a better time telling that story.
And that highlights how lucky we are to have Jeff on the team and how quickly he's shifted his thinking and his thought process, which is awesome to hear. And I completely agree with everything you said. One thing he pointed out, we talk about the disability first, but I think in general in sport, it's a person who is an athlete. In parasport, it's a person who's an athlete who has a disability. It's the third tier that people focus on. And sometimes that can be counterintuitive or frustrating or create a new dynamic that can be a challenge. I think in general too, we talk about advocacy. I think one thing that I'm really excited about is come hosting LA 2028 Paralympic Games on home soil and having equal broadcasting opportunities for Olympic and Paralympic Games. I think that's going to be a huge potential spark. At the last Summer Games, having a nightly recap was a step in the right direction, but having equal broadcast representation is going to be just a whole nother level. Because I think in general, the American sporting fan doesn't always quite know a lot about Paralympic sport. And we're talking about the third largest sporting event in the world. We're not talking about some small, backyard pickup game here. You go back to the London Games, 2.4 million tickets sold. You go to Rio, not as good at categorizing how many tickets were sold, but somewhere between 2.2 and 2.4 where they're watching, Sam compete. You go to Tokyo, and unfortunately COVID had other plans for it, but over 3 million tickets sold out in the first week. This is a large sporting event that has great stories about great athletes who are great people. And I think the American sporting fanhood is going to be excited to learn more about it. With that caveat, I hope during broadcasting, there's educational component to it. And that's where I think former athletes could be considered as color commentators, because who knows the sport better than the former athletes themselves? If you just put the sporting avenue in front of the average fan who has no idea what classifications are or what the differences are in equipment within classifications or what a time factor is, then it's confusing. But if you have somebody who can educate them while they're exposed to this new avenue, then that can be really, really exciting. And that can be something that can be really special.
I'll speak to two sort of specific elements of that question and give historical context for one of them. So within the past few weeks, we lost a trailblazer in the world of disability by the name of Judy Heumann. Judy Heumann is probably one of the best advocates for disability and accessibility that this world has ever seen. So I bring her up because you ask about sort of what ways can we do better with advocacy, to talk about healthcare and then to talk about sort of at the collegiate level. From a healthcare standpoint, it is beyond me why we still don't understand how to then better provide access for patients with disabilities. We go to medical school to take care of patients, and by definition, almost every single one of our patients has some sort of temporary or permanent disability, yet we still are failing in providing equitable access to that community. And so while I don't like to see the disability first, as they were saying, there are times where we do, because we need to recognize that the reason this person does not have access is simply on the basis of disability. And because we have not figured out a way to provide equitable access, that is why we still have so many people that could be benefiting from these programs not having access to them. And so from a healthcare standpoint, that's doing a better job with our medical education system to then make sure that medical students, clinicians of any sort of higher educational space that will be seeing patients recognize that. And then from a higher ed standpoint, we're blessed to be positioned in a way that I also govern all of our disability services here. And so being able to advocate for the fact that our students with disabilities deserve to have the same access to a University of Michigan experience that students without disabilities have. And so in terms of being able to provide that access, when you then speak to administrators and you say, once again, look, these students have this, these students do not. What is the difference? Disability. That's it. And so if we then get people to recognize that there's an entire population of individuals that we are not serving, we are not supporting, we're not providing access to simply on the basis of disability, we're able to hopefully move that needle because the resources exist. They are there. They're just not being equitably distributed because too often we actually don't know that those individuals are there. And the reason that they're not there is often because there's no ramp or elevator to get them to the 7th floor of the building where you're having the meeting to discuss it.
Those are great points. Yeah, there's definitely a lot that we can do to move forward for sure. We have just about 10 minutes left in the session. We can take maybe one more in-person question and then look to close it out. Anybody else have one? Yeah. Question here. Sorry, we'll wait for the microphone again. Oh, sorry, it was up here first, Viddy.
All right. So I'm interested in what is possible to be the new or emerging sports in Paralympics or adaptive sports in general in the future?
Well, I can tell you that the #1 sport growing in America is pickleball. And so we've done I'm not kidding. And we've done adaptive pickleball and it was a huge success. I'm not sure it's going to be a Paralympic sport, guys. No. Okay. I'm getting the no on the Paralympic sport for pickleball, but I don't know.
I think in our area, para dance sport has actually been petitioning the IPC to be officially part of the Paralympics. And they have international competition. One of the founding, I guess one of the leads really pushing this movement in the US is Dance Mobility is an organization affiliated with RIM Foundation in Detroit, run by a former Paralympian swimmer. So she's really pushed this, and it's so you'll see more of that. I mean, I think that might be one potentially. I don't know. You guys might have the in on what other sports are petitioning.
Pickleball, right?
I don't know. I think Sam just commented that we're getting 5-a-side soccer is coming back for 28, not 24, and not sure what are getting added for 24. Okay, so maybe we have development athletes coming up. Okay. Yeah, so I'm not sure at the highest level what it's going to be, but I think I'm very curious what's created, I think, because that's of more interest, I think, to me.
I think another avenue too, outside of just new sport, is the adaptation and modification of including more classifications across sports that currently exist too, and that's always on the radar. So there's been classifications that have been moved out of Paralympic cycles that are coming back in sports that already exist. And that's another avenue too for more potential inclusion and participation at the elite level of adaptive sport.
I'll say that's probably getting back to like one of the first questions that came up of like misconceptions is I think a lot of people don't even understand the depth within Paralympic sports of what, like, each sport is oftentimes like 5 different sports within it. So like in para triathlon, you have 3 broad categories, visually impaired athletes who often have a guide, athletes in wheelchair that use a wheelchair for the running and cycle, and then ambulatory athletes that have differing levels of amputation or limb deficiency. And so not every, but different Paralympic sports have different breadth of that. And so, yeah, so what in one sport, you may have, athletes with amputations have now opportunities, or you may find a way to have, athletes in a wheelchair or something are able to do that sport. So I think that's the other dimension to it. Yeah.
All right, we can get to your question now. We still have a little bit of time left.
Thanks. I actually don't really have a question, but when you were talking about healthcare and what can be done, I think, so my background is, I've spent 30 plus years coaching quad rugby or working with wheelchair basketball from the junior level through the Paralympic level. And I think, and as a pediatric PT, what I learned from working with the sport is that when I would go work with the patient clinically, my expectation wasn't what the textbooks or what I learned in PT school was that they could achieve, but what did I know that those Paralympic athletes were doing, and strive for that. So as for the clinicians in the room, if you strive during that initial rehab to get them to that higher level, to not just set the bar at what, is the basic level that they can do, but really set the bar higher, then that also promotes more people interested in the sports and interested in moving to a much higher level, to that Paralympic level.
That's great. And yeah, I think I'll just close it out because we do have a decent amount of students that were on the call about how can students in kinesiology or in even other fields get involved in adaptive sports. And how can they kind of move forward?
As a faculty member at a university, show up, get to know your professors, ask to do research. As an undergraduate, like, just because you're a freshman doesn't mean that you can't get involved in the lab. There's always something to do. There's always room to grow. But show up, see if you want to volunteer at a program. I mean, that's how a lot of us got involved. Was we volunteered. We showed up one day at a summer camp and we got hooked. I coach soccer through wheelchair basketball, and just the amount of individuals who come in and they're like, "What, you do that too?" I'm like, yeah. Can I come? Absolutely. So we're willing to bring you in, and it's part of that community too, where I don't think we're to the point where we're turning people away yet.
Yeah, so feel free to come out. We got 6 a.m. basketball. Right before work, you guys can get out there and come work out with us. Definitely it's cool sport to participate in. And I just want to go like this a little bit. So I've been walking for like 4 years now. I spent 4 years of my life in a wheelchair. And if it wasn't for adaptive sports, I don't know, because I think the more, because I haven't never heard of, wheelchair tennis, wheelchair basketball, or even the Paralympics until my accident, and I think once we get the more people to look at this sport, actually come out and see it, I think they will think it was like so cool that they have to be a part of it, or somehow they have to tell the next person so they can be a part of it. So I think once we get that issue resolved, then we'll start opening up doors for more facilities for people with disabilities, and we'll have access to all those things that we need. So, yeah.
And I'll say for all the students on the call asking about what they can do, I'll echo both of those and say, I think first step is showing up. Yeah. And just go. I mean, I'm sure these guys wouldn't mind whether it's basketball, track and field, if you're down there just watching. I mean, when I started my job at USOPC, that's what I did a lot of, was just going to practice. And like, I can't do anything until, not only do I learn your sport, but like just build the trust of just showing up. And by doing so, I promise you will have so many more questions than you have answers, like from just observing. And that's fun, like as a student, because that then just, puts you in all sorts of trajectories. And I'll say finally then, like if you truly are, a student that's really interested in this, like I'm adjunct in kinesiology. And if you would like to do, independent studies, I'm happy to guide reading or anything like that in this topic to work with you. Could support in that capacity. But first, get down trackside or courtside.
So I think, I'm sure I'll embarrass her, but Kate Panzer's in the audience here. She's an excellent example of what this might look like. So Kate, you never participated in adaptive sports. You don't have a physical disability, but she has been a part of countless projects. She's leading countless projects just to improve awareness and accessibility of adaptive sports. Just this past weekend, presenting to a ton of physicians and healthcare providers in the area who can then go take that lesson that they learned from Kate and teach their peers about it. And so I think identifying, a way to step in, designing a project, joining an existing project, even just spreading the word can really go a long ways, especially because right now I think awareness is still a big problem. So there are tons of ways to get involved.
UMaze, we are taking volunteers at all times. So if you Google UMaze, you'll find our website and there's an email that you can email. And we'll do the training we have training for you guys. So you can volunteer for any of our programs, and we have programs all year, all 12 months, all year long. And we're leading up to a super busy summer season. So we'll take all the volunteers that we can.
Wonderful. Okay, we are perfectly at time. So thank you all for coming and joining in this panel tonight. Please join me in thanking them for their time. And then please remember, there will be a survey that will be emailed out after the event. If you could please provide feedback, that would be fantastic. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your Monday evening. Thank you. Oh, well. Let's see. So I think we're just going to end it here. I'm sorry. I don't know what it'll sound like coming through the room. So we had a lot of questions coming through Q&A, and I appreciate it. If you still have a lot of questions, there is an ESSI email account that's linked with this. So thank you all for your attendance, and I hope you have a great rest of your night. Yeah.